As African camels gold remnants Bankrupted level of gold overwhelmed the world.
There are weapons capable of destroying a nation in the blink of an eye, and people often think of swords, firearms, or cavalry trampling over city walls. But history has witnessed a collapse much quieter, far more beautiful, and equally as cruel. A collapse born not of hatred but of supreme generosity. Across the globe, human beings kill each other to fight for gold. But have you ever heard of a mighty empire staggering, an entire economy being eradicated for 12 long years, simply because a man passed by and gave away too much gold? This is not a legend stepping out from the pages of mythology. It is a glorious truth buried beneath the hot sands of the Sahara Desert. It is the story of a black king, a man who carried the weight of an entire continent on his shoulders, reaching out to the world not to conquer, but to give. Today, we will turn back to the most magnificent pages of human history to gaze upon the portrait of the wealthiest man of all time. If you feel moved by the deeply humanistic and majestic hidden corners of history, please like this video, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel so you do not miss our upcoming journeys through space and time. The journey begins now. Amidst the winds carrying the harsh taste of sand and the scorching heat of the African continent, there existed a kingdom that felt like a gilded dream. It was Mali in the 14th century, while much of Europe was still engulfed in the darkness of plagues, wars, and bloody purges. Deep within West Africa, a great civilization was shining brilliantly. People often visualize Africa through austere lenses, through tales of poverty or the sorrowful historical pages of slavery. Yet the flow of time always harbors forgotten truths. Black history does not begin with chains. It begins with unyielding thrones, where emperors ruled over lands vaster than all of Western Europe combined. And at the zenith of that splendor reigned a name whose echo once shook the Arab world in distant Europe: Mansa Musa. The word Mansa in the native tongue does not merely mean king. It signifies an emperor, an absolute sovereign, a ruler of kings. And his kingdom, Mali, was a river overflowing with the most precious metals humanity had ever coveted. Beneath the soil of Mali, gold was not a scarce resource to be hoarded. Gold was so abundant here that it became the breath of the kingdom, mingling with the dust, gleaming on domed roofs, and serving as a silent language of power. Mansa Musa ascended to the throne in the year 1312, inheriting a prosperous land stretching from the Atlantic coast all the way to the heart of the vast desert. Under his ruling hand, the kingdom not only expanded territorially but also reached a pinnacle of economic prosperity, standing at the summit of power, possessing wealth that even the greatest billionaires of today's technological era could never fathom. Mansa Musa did not lose himself in vulgar indulgence. In the heart of this black emperor, material wealth seemed to be merely a medium, a tool for him to touch more transcendent values. As a devout Muslim, he harbored a primal yearning to face the holy city of Mecca. In the philosophy of the faithful, this mortal world, even if plated in gold, is but a temporary dwelling, a place of exile for souls awaiting their return to the source. Supreme wealth did not blind Mansa Musa. On the contrary, it urged him to undertake a journey beyond the borders of safety, across the deadly sea of Saharan sand, to seek salvation for his soul. But Mansa Musa was no ordinary pilgrim. He was the embodiment of the African continent, the pride of millions of black people. When the emperor decided to leave his throne to walk the path of faith, he chose a way of walking that would force the world to look up, to remember, and to bow before the legacy of Mali. The aspiration to touch the sacred, to understand the mind of a ruler who holds the world in his palms. One must look beyond the gleaming surface of his crown and peer into the quiet depths of his faith. For Mansa Musa, the unimaginable opulence of Mali was not a testament to his own divinity, but a humbling reminder of his mortality. In the Islamic tradition, the Hajj is a sacred duty, a pilgrimage to Mecca that every devout Muslim must undertake if they possess the means. Yet, for a sovereign of his magnitude, leaving the heart of the empire was an act of profound vulnerability. It meant entrusting the political machinery of a vast territory to others, stepping away from the absolute security of the throne, and surrendering oneself to the unpredictable mercy of the natural world. But the call of the divine is often louder than the whispers of political caution. In the year 1324, that call resonated through the halls of Nia, the capital of Mali, not as a mere religious obligation, but as an awakening. Mansa Musa understood a philosophical truth that many modern conquerors have failed to grasp. Wealth in isolation is merely hoarded metal, devoid of life and legacy. To him, the gold that flowed through his lands was a divine gift, and to hide it away in the dark vaults of his palace would be an affront to the creator who bestowed it. This pilgrimage, therefore, was to be a convergence of profound spiritual devotion and unparalleled geopolitical ambition. He sought the purification of his soul beneath the shadow of the Kaaba, but he also carried the pride of the African continent within his chest. At that time, the great centers of the world, from the bustling markets of Cairo to the maritime republics of Europe, knew almost nothing of the majestic empires thriving south of the Sahara. They viewed the world through narrow lenses, ignorant of the sophisticated cultures and immense power quietly flourishing in the African interior. Mansa Musa decided it was time to shatter that ignorance. He would not travel to Mecca as a humble, unseen penitent. He would travel as the Emperor of Mali, bringing the undeniable proof of African greatness to the doorsteps of the East. His journey was a deliberate stroke of genius, a peaceful crusade not to conquer lands, but to conquer the collective consciousness of humanity. The gathering of power, the decree of the Emperor, swept across the savannas and forests of Mali like a powerful, unseen wind, setting in motion a mobilization that defied human comprehension. What happened next was not the preparation for a simple journey. It was the uprooting of an entire civilization, a logistical miracle that still leaves historians in awe. Imagine a city deciding to walk across the earth. That is what the caravan of Mansa Musa resembled. The preparations required months of relentless, meticulous coordination. From the furthest reaches of the empire, people and resources flowed into the capital, creating a vibrant, thrumming tapestry of life and purpose. Tens of thousands of souls were summoned to join the emperor on this monumental undertaking. Soldiers, scholars, artisans, and servants gathered in numbers so vast they stretched beyond the horizon. It is recorded that an entourage of 60,000 men accompanied him, a moving tide of humanity clad in fine Persian silk and intricate brocades, their garments catching the golden rays of the African sun. Among them were thousands of heralds bearing staffs adorned with pure gold, walking in perfect synchronization to announce the arrival of their sovereign. But the human element was only a fraction of this breathtaking spectacle. Behind the endless columns of men came the lifeblood of the desert, a seemingly infinite line of camels. There were up to 80 camels, each burdened not with common trade goods, but with hundreds of pounds of pure gold dust. The sheer weight of this wealth was enough to crush the economies of nations. Yet here it was, swaying rhythmically to the heavy footsteps of the beasts of burden. Every detail of this expedition was curated to project power and dignity. The emperor provided for his immense retinue with unwavering generosity, ensuring that every person, down to the lowliest servant, was fed and clothed in a manner befitting the subjects of the wealthiest monarch on earth. As the final preparations culminated, the air in Niani grew thick with anticipation. The sounds of braying animals, rhythmic drums, and murmured prayers blending into a symphony of historic magnitude. When the first step was finally taken, and the colossal caravan began its slow, majestic advance toward the unforgiving sands of the Sahara, the earth itself seemed to tremble. Mansa Musa was no longer just a king ruling from a distant throne. He was a living myth, a force of nature carrying the soul of Africa across the dunes, ready to etch his name into the annals of eternity.
The continent-shaking footsteps. When the great caravan finally stirred from its resting place, it was as if a mountain had suddenly decided to walk. The departure from the lush, verdant embrace of Niani was not marked by the chaotic frenzy of an army marching to war, but by the deliberate, rhythmic cadence of a civilization in motion. To witness this exodus was to look upon a moving city, a sprawling tapestry of humanity that stretched far beyond the limits of the horizon. The earth beneath their feet vibrated with the collective weight of tens of thousands of souls, the heavy padding of camel hooves, and the steady marching of men bound by a singular divine purpose. It was a procession that defied the very laws of nature, a golden river flowing uphill against the currents of the dry African winds. As the sun climbed higher into the sky, its rays caught the countless specks of gold adorning the staves of the heralds and the silken garments of the courtiers, creating a blinding spectacle of light. The air was filled with a symphony of disparate sounds that somehow harmonized into a song of absolute power. The murmurs of prayers, the clinking of harnesses, the soft rustle of expensive fabrics, and the distant rhythmic beating of drums that dictated the pace of the journey. Mansa Musa rode at the heart of this magnificent storm, an anchor of calm amidst a sea of motion. He was carrying his empire with him, not just in the material wealth strapped to the backs of beasts, but in the minds of the scholars, the hands of the artisans, and the unwavering loyalty of his soldiers. This was a profound philosophical statement written in the dust of the earth. Throughout history, kings have built massive walls to protect their wealth, enclosing themselves in fortresses of stone and paranoia. Mansa Musa, however, chose to expose his wealth to the open air, moving it across the face of the continent for all to see. He understood that true power is not static, it is kinetic. By parading the soul of Mali across the land, he was not merely traveling from one point to another. He was redrawing the map of the world's imagination. Every step taken by this colossal caravan was a footprint left upon the memory of time, a declaration that the children of Africa were not a forgotten people living in the shadows, but architects of a splendor that the world had yet to comprehend. The harsh sea of sand. Yet the journey toward the sacred is never without its crucible. As the lush landscapes of the south gradually surrendered to the arid, unforgiving expanse of the Sahara, the golden caravan met its most silent and terrible adversary. The Sahara is not merely a desert, it is an ocean of fire and silence, a vast, indifferent void that mocks the trivial ambitions of mortal men. Here the rules of the world are rewritten. In the heart of this barren realm, a profound and humbling duality emerged, pitting the supreme wealth of an empire against the absolute cruelty of nature. as the temperatures soared during the day to flesh-searing extremes and plummeted at night into a bone-chilling abyss, the true weight of the journey began to manifest. The gold dust that filled the saddlebags of the camels, so highly prized in the bustling markets of the world, suddenly lost its luster in the face of blinding sandstorms and parched throats. In the deep Sahara, a single drop of water holds more value than a mountain of pure gold. This harsh reality forced a philosophical reckoning upon the tens of thousands who marched under the Malian banner. They were surrounded by unimaginable riches, draped in the finest silks, yet they were entirely at the mercy of the elements, stripped down to their most vulnerable human core. Mansa Musa, riding amidst the swirling sands, felt the profound weight of his leadership. The desert is a great equalizer, stripping away the illusions of human grandeur to reveal the fragile tether of existence. The survival of this moving city depended not on the gold they carried, but on the precise knowledge of ancient trade routes, the endurance of the human spirit, and the mercy of the divine. The crossing was an agonizing test of faith and willpower. Each step through the shifting dunes was a victory against despair, a testament to the resilience of a people who refused to be swallowed by the earth. In this desolate crucible, the wealth of Mali was purified. The journey transformed from a majestic parade of geopolitical dominance into a deeply spiritual pilgrimage. The emperor and his people learned that while gold can buy the awe of men, it cannot buy a single breath of wind or a cloud of rain. The desert taught them the ultimate lesson of humility, a lesson that Mansa Musa would carry within his heart long after the sands had been left behind. They walked through the valley of the shadow of the earth, a golden procession dissolving into the haze of the horizon, slowly inching their way toward the distant promises of the east.
The silhouette of Cairo in sight. After what felt like an eternity suspended in the breathless void of the Sahara, the horizon finally began to shift. The merciless, blinding yellow of the endless dunes gradually yielded to the soft, life-giving hues of green and brown. The air, which for months had tasted of ash and fire, suddenly carried the heavy, sweet scent of damp earth and flowing water. The great caravan had reached the fertile embrace of the Nile Valley. As the moving city of Mali crested the final ridges of the desert, a collective exhale swept through the ranks of the tens of thousands of travelers. Below them, sprawling across the banks of the ancient river, lay Cairo. In the 14th century, Cairo was not merely a city, it was the beating heart of the Mamluk Sultanate, the undisputed center of the Islamic world, and a cosmopolitan crossroads where the wealth and knowledge of Europe, Asia, and Africa converged. It was a metropolis of towering minarets, labyrinthine bazaars, and impregnable stone fortresses, a place accustomed to the daily influx of merchants, scholars, and weary pilgrims. Yet, as the sun climbed to its zenith, casting its golden light upon the approaching multitude, Cairo was about to witness a spectacle that would paralyze its bustling streets and shatter its understanding of the world. The arrival of Mansa Musa and his immense retinue was not simply a physical entrance into a foreign capital, it was a profound philosophical disruption. For centuries, the scholars and rulers of the Mediterranean and the Middle East had harbored a limited, often patronizing view of the lands south of the Sahara. They imagined the African interior as a realm of untamed wilderness, fragmented tribes, and primitive existence. The narrative of Black history, even then, was frequently written by outsiders who failed to see beyond the periphery of their own trade routes. But as the vanguard of the Malian Empire descended upon the city, wrapped in the finest Persian silks, bearing staffs of solid gold, and marching with the disciplined synchrony of a supreme imperial guard, every preconceived notion held by the Cairenes dissolved into the dust. The citizens of Cairo poured out of their homes, crowding the rooftops, the balconies, and the narrow alleys, standing in absolute, stunned silence. They were not looking at a procession of humble penitents begging for safe passage, nor were they witnessing the arrival of a conquered people brought forth in chains. They were staring into the face of a civilization whose grandeur rivaled and perhaps even eclipsed their own. The visual impact was overwhelming, a sensory overload that defied logic. The sheer volume of gold that caught the Egyptian sun, gleaming from the adornments of the soldiers, the harnesses of the horses, and the immense burdens carried by the endless line of camels, was so vast that it seemed to mock the very concept of scarcity. But beyond the blinding wealth, there was an unmistakable aura of dignity. The people of Mali walked with the upright posture of those who knew their place in the universe, an unyielding pride that emanated from their sovereign. Mansa Musa, riding amid this ocean of opulence, remained a portrait of serene composure. He did not look upon the great city of Cairo with the wide-eyed wonder of a provincial traveler. He surveyed it with the calm, evaluating gaze of a peer. His presence in the shadow of the pyramids was a quiet but absolute declaration of existence. It was a moment where the unseen front line of human history was suddenly illuminated, forcing the world to acknowledge that greatness, intellect, and divine favor were not the exclusive domains of the North or the East. The silhouette of Cairo, monumental and ancient, was now serving as the grand stage for the ultimate revelation of the Black Emperor's power, setting the scene for an inevitable encounter that would test the boundaries of pride and diplomacy.
The clash of two monarchs. The citadel of Cairo, a massive fortress of stone perched high above the city, was the seat of absolute power for the Mamluk Sultan Al-Nasir Muhammad. Within its heavily guarded walls, the protocol was rigid and the hierarchy was absolute. The Mamluk court was a theater of dominance where every gesture, every spoken word, and every silence was carefully calibrated to reinforce the supremacy of the Sultan over all who entered his domain. When foreign dignitaries, regardless of their wealth or origin, were granted an audience, custom demanded a singular, humiliating act of submission. They were required to kiss the ground before the Sultan's feet. It was a physical manifestation of political subservience, a clear acknowledgement that in the presence of the Mamluk ruler, all other crowns were rendered obsolete. As Mansa Musa was invited to ascend the steps of the citadel, the air grew thick with an unspoken, dangerous tension. This was no longer just a meeting between a host and a pilgrim. It was a collision of two towering spheres of influence, a delicate diplomatic tightrope suspended over an abyss of potential conflict. Mansa Musa entered the grand audience hall, leaving behind the cacophony of his massive entourage. The hall was lined with the elite Mamluk guard, their faces impassive, their hands resting on the hilts of their swords. At the far end, seated upon a throne that commanded the vast, echoing space, waited Sultan al-Nasir Muhammad. As the Emperor of Mali approached, the Mamluk courtiers instructed him to perform the customary prostration. Time seemed to stop. The silence in the room became absolute, heavy with the weight of colliding empires. For Mansa Musa, to bow and kiss the earth before another mortal man was an unthinkable betrayal of his own sovereignty. He was the Mansa, the king of kings, the ruler of an empire that dwarfed the lands of the Mamluks in both size and mineral wealth. To submit to the Sultan would be to lower the dignity of the millions of people he represented, to validate the false hierarchy that placed the Arab world above the African interior. Yet, to outright refuse the command in the heart of the Sultan's own fortress was a dangerous provocation that could ignite a catastrophic war, stranding his people and destroying his sacred pilgrimage before it even reached Mecca. In this crucible of pride and politics, Mansa Musa demonstrated a profound philosophical genius that transcended the crude mechanics of power. He stood tall, his gaze meeting the Sultan's, unblinking and unyielding. When the demand to kiss the ground was repeated, the Black Emperor finally moved, but he did not speak words of submission to the man on the throne. Instead, he loudly and clearly proclaimed that he would prostrate himself before no one but Allah, the creator of the heavens and the earth, the architect of all destinies. With that absolute declaration of faith, Mansa Musa bowed deeply, touching his forehead to the floor. By directing his submission entirely to the divine, he masterfully fulfilled the physical requirements of the court's protocol without surrendering a single fraction of his imperial dignity. He transformed an act of political humiliation into an act of supreme religious devotion. Sultan al-Nasir Muhammad, witnessing this brilliant maneuver, recognized the intellect and the unbending spirit of the man standing before him. The tension in the hall dissolved, replaced by a profound, mutual respect. The Sultan invited the Emperor of Mali to sit beside him, not as a vassal, but as an equal. The clash of the two monarchs ended not with the drawing of blades, but with the triumph of an unassailable identity. In that grand hall in Cairo, Mansa Musa had protected the honor of his people and forced the established powers of the world to make room at the table of greatness for the sovereign of the African sands. The golden rain pours down. With the delicate dance of diplomacy masterfully navigated, the heavy gates of Cairo's elite circles swung wide open, welcoming the Emperor of Mali not merely as a pilgrim, but as an exalted guest of the Mamluk Sultanate. The tension that had briefly suffocated the grand halls of the citadel evaporated, replaced by an atmosphere of unprecedented jubilation. As Mansa Musa and his immense retinue descended from the high fortress and merged with the sprawling, chaotic life of the city below, a phenomenon began that would be etched into the memory of the Middle East for generations. The people of Cairo, accustomed to the sight of wealthy merchants and noblemen haggling over the price of silk and spices, were entirely unprepared for the sheer, unbridled magnitude of African generosity. What they were about to witness was not an act of trade, nor a display of arrogant extravagance. It was a profound philosophical expression of detachment from the material world, manifested through a torrential downpour of gold. To comprehend the mindset of Mansa Musa during his stay in Cairo, one must look past the modern, cynical interpretations of wealth. In our era, billionaires accumulate fortunes to build invisible walls around themselves, hoarding resources to secure power and immortality. But in the spiritual cosmology of this devout black monarch, gold was not the ultimate destination. It was merely the dust of the earth, a transient tool granted by the divine to test the character of men. As he prepared his soul to stand before the Creator in Mecca, the weight of his worldly possessions became a spiritual burden. To cling to the gold of Mali while seeking the purity of the heavens would be a contradiction of his faith. Therefore, he chose to unburden himself. He gave not out of a desire to be praised, but out of a profound sense of duty and a radical interpretation of charity. The markets of Cairo, a labyrinth of sensory overload where every language of the known world was spoken, became the stage for this unprecedented philanthropy. As the emperor's caravan moved through the narrow streets, his officials distributed gold to anyone who crossed their path. Beggars sitting in the dust, who had never touched a silver coin in their miserable lives, suddenly found their hands overflowing with pure, unrefined gold dust. Royal officials of the Mamluk court were gifted heavy ingots that surpassed their decades of accumulated salary. Mansa Musa purchased the finest Egyptian textiles, exotic perfumes, and provisions for his onward journey, but he did not negotiate. When the shrewd merchants of Cairo, sensing an opportunity, inflated their prices to astronomical heights, the emperor paid them without a moment of hesitation or word of complaint. He tipped the merchants, the innkeepers, and the stable hands with solid gold, treating the most precious metal on earth as if it were water drawn from the Nile. This boundless generosity was a reflection of the Malian soul. It was a civilization so rich, so deeply anchored in its own prosperity, that it did not need to clutch its treasures in fear of tomorrow. The people of Cairo were intoxicated by this golden rain. For weeks the city lived in a state of euphoric delusion, believing that the heavens had finally opened to bless them with infinite prosperity. They sang praises to the Black King, marveling at the boundless wealth of the mysterious lands south of the Sahara Desert. The narrative of Africa had been rewritten in their minds. It was no longer a land of the unknown, but the very fountain of fortune. Yet, amidst the jubilation, the merchants and the nobles failed to grasp a fundamental law of the universe, that every action, no matter how pure its intent, carries a consequence. They were too busy dancing in the golden rain to notice the dark clouds gathering on the economic horizon.
Kindness bearing the seeds of destruction. There is a tragic, almost poetic irony woven into the fabric of human existence. Sometimes, the most profound acts of goodness can unleash the most devastating storms. As Mansa Musa finally gathered his massive caravan, turning his back on the glittering city of Cairo to resume his secret march toward the deserts of Arabia, he left behind a population basking in newfound wealth. Every merchant felt like a king, every beggar felt like a lord.
The streets were virtually paved with the gold of Mali. But the euphoria was fragile, an illusion built upon a fundamental misunderstanding of what gives money its power. Wealth, in the eyes of humanity, is not an absolute truth. It is a delicate agreement, a balance constructed entirely upon the foundation of scarcity. When the rare becomes common, it is stripped of its magic. The silent destruction began shortly after the dust from the Malian camels settled. With so much gold suddenly injected into the arteries of Cairo's markets, the metal itself lost its sovereign power. The merchants, who had hoarded the gold dust they received from the emperor, went to the markets to buy bread, meat, and labor, only to discover that the farmers and the artisans also possessed chests full of gold. Suddenly, no one wanted to trade their vital, life-sustaining goods for a metal that was now as ubiquitous as the sand blowing in from the desert. The value of gold plummeted with terrifying speed. Prices for the most basic necessities, a loaf of bread, a measure of grain, a simple woven cloth, skyrocketed to unimaginable heights. The golden rain had transformed into a crushing flood of hyperinflation. This was an economic catastrophe unlike any the world had ever seen, and it had been triggered not by a besieging army, not by a ruthless blockade, but by the overwhelming charity of a single man. The citizens of Cairo, who had recently sung the praises of the Black Emperor, now found themselves starving while clutching handfuls of pure gold. They could not eat the gold, nor could it shield them from the cold. The very instrument that was supposed to liberate them from poverty had become the chain that dragged them into an abyss of destitution. The Mamluk economy, once the envy of the Mediterranean, was entirely paralyzed. It was a philosophical nightmare, the realization that the systems men build to govern their lives are so incredibly fragile that a mere act of unchecked generosity can shatter them entirely. The devastation was not a fleeting crisis, it was a deep, festering wound. Historical records reveal that it took the Egyptian economy over 12 grueling years to recover from the inflation caused by Mansa Musa's brief visit. For over a decade, the shadow of the Malian emperor lingered over the markets of the Middle East, a haunting reminder of the sheer, terrifying scale of African power. Mansa Musa had inadvertently waged the most devastating form of warfare without ever drawing a sword. He had proven that the wealth of his empire was so vast, so unfathomable, that it could warp the very reality of the nations it touched. In his quest to purify his soul through supreme charity, the emperor had unknowingly taught the world a harsh, unforgettable lesson about the fragile illusion of human economies and the heavy, destructive weight of a golden crown. Standing before the holy site. Leaving the chaotic, golden-drenched aftermath of Cairo behind, the great Malian caravan pressed onward into the unforgiving heart of the Arabian Peninsula. If the Sahara was a test of physical endurance, the final stretch toward Mecca was a crucible for the soul. The landscape here was stripped of all pretense, a stark rocky wilderness that offered no comfort and demanded absolute surrender. For Mansa Musa, this was the culmination of his lifelong yearning. Every step taken by his weary camels, every drop of sweat that fell upon the scorching Arabian sand brought him closer to the epicenter of his faith. When the distant, jagged mountains enclosing the Holy Valley finally came into view, a profound silence fell over the tens of thousands of travelers. The beating of the drums ceased. The royal heralds lowered their golden staffs. The Emperor of Mali, the man whose wealth had just shattered the economy of the Mamluk Sultanate, was about to confront the ultimate equalizer of human existence. To enter the sacred precincts of Mecca, a pilgrim must undergo a physical and spiritual shedding. It is a ritual designed to strip away the illusions of the mortal world. As Mansa Musa prepared to cross the threshold of the holy city, he was required to remove his crown, his intricate brocades, and his fine Persian silks. The heavy ornaments of solid gold that marked his absolute sovereignty were cast aside. In their place, he draped himself in the ihram, two simple, unstitched garments of white cloth. In that transformative moment, the Mansa, the king of kings, the conqueror, the richest man to ever walk the earth, ceased to exist. He became simply Musa, a fragile, mortal soul standing naked before the infinite magnitude of the Creator. Surrounded by thousands of other pilgrims from every corner of the known world, clad in the exact same white garments,
the Black Emperor became entirely indistinguishable from the poorest beggar in his retinue. This is the profound philosophical beauty of the Hajj, a truth that struck at the very core of Mansa Musa's being. As he walked barefoot into the grand courtyard and laid his eyes upon the Kaaba, the black cubic structure standing at the center of the world, he understood the utter impermanence of his earthly empire. The gold of Mali, which had the power to bend foreign courts and blind the merchants of Cairo, held absolutely no currency here. You cannot bribe eternity. You cannot purchase a seat in the afterlife with dust dug from the earth. As he joined the mesmerizing circular tide of humanity circumambulating the Kaaba, moving counterclockwise like the very stars in the heavens, the emperor wept. He wept not of sorrow, but out of a shattering, beautiful realization of his own smallness. The vastness of his African kingdom, the armies that marched at his command, the mountains of gold he commanded, all of it was reduced to a fleeting whisper against the eternal roar of the divine. In the shadow of the Kaaba, Mansa Musa found the ultimate liberation, the freedom from the heavy, suffocating illusion that material wealth makes a man a god.
While the Black Emperor bowed his head in the sacred, sun-baked dust of Mecca, surrendering his worldly titles to the heavens, a different kind of storm was beginning to gather far away. The world in the 14th century was a fractured place, isolated by vast oceans, treacherous deserts, and walls of mutual ignorance. Europe, at this time, was a continent locked in a struggle for survival. It was an era defined by brutal feudal wars, suffocating religious dogma, and the looming, catastrophic shadow of the Black Death. To the kings and scholars of Paris, London, and Venice, the world beyond the Mediterranean was largely a dark, terrifying mystery. They possessed a profoundly arrogant yet fragile worldview, believing themselves to be the center of civilization, while dismissing the African continent as an uninhabitable wasteland of myth and savagery. But history has a way of violently correcting the delusions of men. The golden rain that Mansa Musa had unleashed upon Cairo was not absorbed by the sands of Egypt. It evaporated, formed massive clouds of rumor, and blew forcefully across the Mediterranean Sea. In the bustling bazaars of Cairo and Alexandria, Italian merchants from the maritime republics of Venice and Genoa had watched the arrival of the Malian caravan with wide, disbelieving eyes. They meticulously recorded the unbelievable volume of gold, the sophisticated organization of the African retinue, and the majestic dignity of the black monarch who bowed to no earthly king. When these merchants loaded their galleys and sailed back to the ports of southern Europe, they carried with them something far more explosive than spices or silk. They carried the truth. The tales of Mansa Musa spread through the taverns, the counting houses, and the royal courts of Europe like a wildfire. They whispered of a land south of the Sahara where gold grew like roots in the soil, ruled by a sovereign whose wealth made the monarchs of Christendom look like impoverished peasants. It was a profound psychological shock to the European consciousness. The narrative of Black history, previously unwritten in Western minds, suddenly erupted into their reality with the blinding force of a supernova. The ultimate manifestation of this global awakening occurred several decades later, in the year 1375, on the island of Majorca. A Jewish cartographer named Abraham Cresques was commissioned to draw a map of the known world, a masterpiece that would become known as the Catalan Atlas. As he charted the contours of Europe and Asia, his quill moved southward to the vast, blank expanse of West Africa. There, in the center of the Sahara, he did not draw monsters or empty voids. He drew a black king, seated upon a throne of gold, wearing a golden crown and holding a massive nugget of solid gold in his hand, offering it to an approaching trader. The inscription beneath read, "This black lord is called Musa Mali. So abundant is the gold which is found in his country that he is the richest and most noble king in all the land." With a few strokes of ink, Mansa Musa was permanently etched into the geopolitical imagination of the West. He forced Europe to look toward Africa not with pity or disdain, but with terrifying awe and eventually a ravenous, world-altering greed. The footsteps of the Malian emperor had crossed a desert, but their echo crossed oceans, forever changing the way humanity viewed the African continent.
Cairo collapses. There is a terrifying stillness that follows the breaking of a storm, a moment of suspended reality before the true extent of the devastation is revealed. For the great city of Cairo, that stillness arrived in the months after Mansa Musa's magnificent caravan disappeared into the eastern horizon, leaving behind a trail of unimaginable wealth. The initial delirium of the golden reign had convinced the Mamluk capital that it had been touched by the divine grace of absolute prosperity. Beggars had abandoned their usual corners, clutching heavy nuggets of gold to their chests, while merchants locked themselves in their counting houses, mesmerized by the sudden multiplication of their fortunes. The streets, once echoing with the desperate haggling of the poor, now hummed with the arrogant whispers of sudden kings. Yet beneath this glittering veneer of sudden enrichment, a silent, invisible venom was beginning to paralyze the very heart of the Egyptian empire. It was an apocalypse born not of fire, famine, or the swords of invading armies, but of an overwhelming, suffocating abundance. To understand the tragedy that befell Cairo is to confront a deeply unsettling philosophical truth about human existence. The value of everything we hold dear is merely an illusion, a fragile consensus built upon the foundation of scarcity. We covet gold precisely because it is rare, because it requires blood, sweat, and time to tear it from the earth. But what happens when the rare becomes as common as the dust blowing through the streets? The people of Cairo were about to learn this brutal lesson. As the euphoria faded and the practical needs of survival reasserted themselves, the newly wealthy citizens took their gold to the markets to purchase the necessities of life. They sought wheat from the Nile Delta, meat from the butchers, and woven cloth to protect themselves from the desert chill. But when they offered their golden dust, they were met with a chilling realization. The farmers, the bakers, and the weavers also possessed chests overflowing with the emperor's gold. No one wanted the precious metal anymore. The psychological collapse of the market was swift and merciless. When gold loses its magic, the physical reality of survival takes absolute precedence. A merchant cannot eat a gold ingot to satiate his hunger, nor can he build a shelter out of gold dust to survive the night. Suddenly, the true wealth of the city, its food, its labor, its basic goods, became infinitely more precious than the metal that had once dictated the destiny of empires. The prices of ordinary commodities began to violently sever their ties to reality. A single loaf of bread, once the humble sustenance of the poorest laborer, skyrocketed to a price that would have previously purchased an entire estate. The golden rain had transformed into a crushing flood of hyperinflation, washing away the established social order and plunging the Mamluk economy into chaos. For 12 agonizing years, the shadow of the Malian emperor suffocated the Middle East. It was a slow, grinding devastation. The Mamluk Sultanate, an empire that had proudly withstood the terrifying onslaught of the Mongol hordes and the relentless campaigns of the Crusaders, found itself utterly defeated by the charity of a single black monarch. The streets of Cairo became a stage of tragic irony, where men draped in gold starved to death in the gutters, their pockets heavy with a wealth that the world had suddenly rejected. This collapse was a profound historical paradox. Mansa Musa had not intended to conquer Egypt. His soul was fixed entirely upon the holy city of Mecca and the purification of his spirit. Yet, by unleashing the boundless prosperity of the African continent upon an unprepared society, he had inadvertently demonstrated a terrifying geopolitical power. He had proven that the empire of Mali was so overwhelmingly vast, so incomprehensibly rich, that its mere footprint could crush the economic foundations of the known world.
The return empty-handed. As the Mamluk Empire descended into a golden famine, Mansa Musa was completing his sacred duties in the holy lands of Arabia. Beneath the blazing sun of Mecca, he had shed his imperial identity, walking shoulder to shoulder with the poorest of pilgrims, surrendering his soul to the vastness of the divine. He had achieved the spiritual culmination he had sought, purifying his heart and fulfilling the ultimate obligation of his faith. But the temporal world is rarely kind to those who linger too long in the realm of the eternal. When the time finally came to turn his face toward the setting sun and begin the arduous journey back to the savannas of Mali, a harsh and humbling reality awaited the emperor. The mountain of gold that had once burdened the backs of 80 camels, the wealth that had blinded Cairo and forever altered the imagination of Europe, was entirely gone. It had been given to the poor in the streets of Alexandria, donated to the holy shrines of Mecca and Medina, and spent with reckless, uncalculated generosity upon the merchants of the Middle East.
The boundless river of Malian wealth had finally run dry. For the first time in his life, the wealthiest man in the history of the world found himself confronting the terrifying specter of vulnerability. He was stranded thousands of miles away from the secure embrace of his throne, leading a massive retinue of soldiers, scholars, and servants who still required food, water, and safe passage across the deadliest deserts on Earth. The journey back could not be fueled by the memory of his past generosity. It required the cold, hard currency of the present. In a twist of fate so profoundly ironic that it borders on the poetic, the King of Kings was forced to become a beggar. To secure the provisions necessary for the survival of his people, Mansa Musa had to seek out the very same merchants in Cairo whom he had so lavishly enriched just months prior. He approached the great moneylenders of the Mamluk capital, men who were now desperately trying to navigate the hyperinflation he had caused, and asked for massive loans. The merchants, recognizing the desperation of the emperor, did not offer him the grace he had once shown them. They charged him exorbitant, predatory interest rates, capitalizing on his vulnerability to extract a heavy toll for his safe return. Mansa Musa, the man who had treated gold as if it were worthless dust, was now forced to pledge the future revenues of his empire just to buy bread and water for his caravan. This humiliating reversal of fortune was not a defeat, but rather the final, most essential philosophical lesson of the pilgrimage. As he rode back across the unforgiving expanse of the Sahara, no longer a golden god, but a man burdened by debt, the emperor achieved a profound clarity. He realized that the ultimate measure of a ruler is not found in the metal he hoards, nor in the fleeting awe he commands from foreign courts. Wealth is a transient illusion, a tide that rises and falls at the whim of circumstance. He had left Mali to find his soul, and the desert demanded everything he owned in exchange for that discovery. He was returning to his kingdom with empty hands. But those hands were now free to build a legacy that would outlast the fragile glitter of gold. The true treasure he was bringing back across the Atlantic winds was not material, but intellectual, a vision of a new Mali that would soon become the beacon of knowledge for the entire world.
The seed of knowledge. The journey back across the merciless expanse of the Sahara was a stark inversion of the triumphant march that had captured the world's imagination just a year prior. The great Malian caravan, once a blinding river of gold and unrestrained power, now moved with the solemn, quiet rhythm of a humbled giant. The saddlebags of the camels, previously burdened with the wealth of an entire continent, were now empty of their glittering dust, replaced by the heavy, invisible weight of debt. Yet, as Mansa Musa rode through the swirling sands, his mind was not clouded by the humiliation of his empty coffers or the predatory interest rates of the Mamluk Sultanate. Instead, a profound alchemy was taking place within his soul. The pilgrimage had stripped away the superficial layers of his imperial pride, leaving behind a crystalline realization. Gold, no matter how vast the quantity, is entirely powerless against the ravages of time. It can be spent, it can be stolen, and as he had witnessed in the markets of the Mamluk Sultanate, its value can evaporate into nothingness in the blink of an eye. To build a legacy that could defy the erosion of centuries, a ruler needed a currency far more enduring than heavy metal. He needed the immortal light of human intellect. Though his hands were empty of gold, Mansa Musa returned to his homeland bearing a treasure that would forever alter the trajectory of the African continent. While in the holy cities of Mecca and Medina, and amidst the academic circles of a recovering Cairo, the emperor had not merely prayed and distributed charity, he had observed, conversed, and recruited. He used the sheer gravitational pull of his charisma and his majestic vision to convince some of the greatest minds of the Islamic world to follow him back into the heart of West Africa. Among them were brilliant theologians, master jurists, visionary poets, and most notably, the renowned Andalusian architect Abu Ishaq al-Sahili. These men did not follow the Black King for the promise of immediate wealth, for they knew his gold was spent. They followed him because they recognized in him the rare, burning ambition of a true sovereign, a man who wished to cultivate a garden of civilization in the middle of the desert. This was the ultimate return on his spiritual investment. He had traded the finite riches of the earth for the infinite potential of the human mind.
Upon crossing the borders back into the sprawling savannas of Mali, Mansa Musa initiated a cultural revolution that would eclipse all his military conquests. He directed his newfound intellectual vanguard toward Timbuktu, a city that sat at the perilous intersection of the Sahara Desert and the winding Niger River. Previously, Timbuktu had been a vital yet purely mercantile hub, a place where the salt of the north was traded for the gold of the south. But under the emperor's visionary mandate, the city was reborn. Al-Sahili, utilizing the baked mud and wood of the local landscape, engineered magnificent structures that blended Islamic geometry with indigenous African aesthetics. He constructed the Jinga Mosque, a breathtaking monument of earth and timber that stood not as a fortress of war, but as a sanctuary of peace and learning. Around these towering mud brick minarets, a new kind of empire began to flourish. Timbuktu transformed into the intellectual capital of the world. The University of Sankore grew into a sprawling academic metropolis, eventually housing hundreds of thousands of manuscripts and accommodating over 25,000 students from across the globe. In the bustling markets of Timbuktu, a profound paradigm shift occurred. The most expensive and highly sought-after commodities were no longer salt, ivory, or even gold. The highest currency in the land became books. Scholars, scribes, and philosophers engaged in rigorous debates on astronomy, mathematics, medicine, and law, creating a repository of knowledge that rivaled the great libraries of antiquity. Mansa Musa had successfully performed the greatest magic known to statecraft. He had taken the silent, cold gold of the earth and transmuted it into the eternal speaking voice of knowledge, planting seeds of wisdom that would outlast the very borders of his empire. Nothingness and eternity. Time is the ultimate, undefeated conqueror of all mortal ambitions. No matter how high the walls are built, no matter how profoundly the laws are written, every empire eventually succumbs to the quiet, relentless creeping of the dust. Decades after Mansa Musa drew his final breath, returning his soul to the creator he had so ardently worshipped, the golden age of Mali began to wane. The vast territory he had united slowly fractured under the weight of internal succession disputes and the rising power of neighboring kingdoms. The Songhai Empire eventually eclipsed Mali, and centuries later, the brutal waves of foreign colonization and the devastating transatlantic slave trade sought to erase the grandeur of the African past entirely. The sprawling palaces of Niani fell into ruin, swallowed by the encroaching savanna. The unimaginable gold mines, the source of the wealth that had once paralyzed the global economy, faded into whispered legends and myths. Even the great mud-brick libraries of Timbuktu had to be hidden beneath the desert sands by brave guardians to protect them from the torches of invaders. Looking upon the physical remnants of the Malian empire today, one might be tempted to conclude that the grand pilgrimage of the 14th century was merely a fleeting illusion, a brief spark in the endless dark expanse of time. Yet, this is where the true philosophy of history reveals its deepest comfort. The essence of human greatness is not measured by the permanence of physical structures, but by the undeniable resonance of the story left behind. The physical gold of Mansa Musa may have been dispersed into the winds of the global economy, melted down and recast 1,000 times over, but the conceptual weight of his existence remains immovable. In an era where the modern world is obsessed with the hollow accumulation of wealth, where tech billionaires and modern oligarchs hoard digital numbers in a desperate bid for immortality, the legacy of the Black Emperor stands as a monumental counter-narrative. He possessed more material wealth than any human being in history. Yet his ultimate triumph was his profound understanding of its absolute insignificance in the face of the divine and the intellectual. He demonstrated that true power is the ability to let go of power, to distribute one's fortunes in the pursuit of something higher, and to elevate an entire people in the process. More importantly, the story of Mansa Musa serves as an unbreakable pillar in the grand architecture of Black history. For centuries, a deliberate and cruel amnesia was forced upon the world, a narrative designed to strip the African continent of its dignity, its intellect, and its sovereign agency. Black history was often violently reduced to a timeline of subjugation, but the very memory of the great Malian pilgrimage shatters those colonial chains into dust. You cannot deny the majesty of a people whose ancestors once dictated the economic currents of the Mediterranean, whose architects built monuments that breathed with the earth, and whose scholars preserved the light of human knowledge while other continents floundered in darkness. Mansa Musa is not just a king of the past, he is an eternal phantom, a reminder of what was and what can be again. As the hot winds of the Sahara continue to blow across the ancient shifting dunes, they carry with them the faint
rhythmic echo of tens of thousands of footsteps, the ghostly chime of golden staffs, and the serene, unyielding gaze of a man who walked across the earth not to conquer it, but to show it the true meaning of grandeur. The gold has long since vanished, the empire has returned to the nothingness of the soil, but the spirit of that magnificent journey remains utterly indestructible. It is a testament to the fact that while men and metals return to the dust, a story told with enough truth, dignity, and grace will echo throughout eternity.